Here to talk to us about this and a lot more that's going on in the federal government is Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Ro Khanna represents California's 17th district and has kind of taken a different approach from other elected Democratic lawmakers. He is reaching out to Republicans, specifically to Trump voters, and I think that's an interesting tactic here. Now, welcome, Congressman Khanna. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
So let me just start off by asking you, what the reaction has been from your fellow Democrats in regard to your strategy in reaching across the aisle to speak to individuals who voted for Donald Trump.
Well, I think they're intrigued. Look, the politicians don't need to be the protagonists in every story. I mean, having us give speeches in front of buildings, fine. But what we really need to know is who is being hurt and having them tell those stories. And the reality is you can't be pro-America and be against American workers. 99% of Americans work. And the story that should be told here is the betrayal. Someone who ran on patriotism and building up America and building up the deindustrialized parts of this country is now hurting voters who voted for him, who never expected that they and their families would be fired or laid off.
Yeah, so I want to get to that outreach because that's super interesting. And smart. But first, Ro, you seem to have done the same thing that Bernie Sanders did, and I would argue that we did, but I want to ask you first rather than assuming it, where you seem to reach out and say, hey, if you do things that progressives agree with, like cutting the Pentagon, et cetera, happy to work with you. If you do things we disagree with, happy to fight you. Is that a fair and accurate description of what you and Bernie Sanders have done so far?
Totally fair description. I think I got criticized. Why are you saying that you may initially work with DOGE? Because a lot of people recognize that there is wasteful government spending. There's an enormous amount of waste with Medicare Advantage. They defraud the government. There's waste with pharmaceuticals who bill Medicare at obnoxious rates. There's waste with Pentagon spending with 5 primes that have almost $1 trillion. And if there was a serious effort in a constitutional, law-abiding way to go after that, I would have worked on that because my loyalty is to the American people, not to just my party. But what happened here is Musk didn't have any interest in the hard work and has instead gone about this with a sledgehammer, a lottery ball of firings in a totally dumb way. And that will, of course, be opposed. And my own view is we have more credibility if we acknowledge that there is waste and that we have a better way of actually tackling it than just reflexively opposing everything.
Yeah, so we're actually going to talk about Medicare Advantage later in this program. You're right, enormous waste there, enormous waste at the Pentagon, and we've always been against that as progressives. We want a government that actually serves the American people and not the donor class and not the bureaucracy. So, but what I'm curious about is, since there are so many different bubbles, Representative Khanna, I'm curious about the Democrats in Washington bubble, because so when we said something very, very similar to, almost identical to what you just said, we were met with a lot of backlash from portions of the left. But on the other hand, tons of people on the left and independents really liked it because there's all these different bubbles, and everyone in every bubble thinks they're the only ones who are right and the only ones who exist, right? So since I don't know the Democrats in Washington anywhere near as well as you do, in that bubble, how was your strategy received?
It was probably frowned upon by people other than Bernie and Warren and a few others. And they said, well, Elon's on the red team. We just need to oppose Elon. And obviously people have been right to be very skeptical of how DOGE has gone about it. And I famously, or not famously, but from a Twitter point of view, infamously got into a fight with him, and he called me a. And I said, I'm not going to go along with things that are basically unconstitutional. But I believe I have more credibility with a lot of voters, Republican independent voters, saying that because I've acknowledged that I'm open to cutting actual waste and to working in the interest of this country. In my New York Times op-ed, the biggest line that got quoted again and again, unfortunately, it wasn't any of my vision. It was simply the Democrats made a mistake by not acknowledging that the status quo is broken and people are righteously angry at the system. And I think if we just started with that, we'd have a lot more clarity.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Democrats seem unwilling to even start with that, but we'll get to that in just a moment. I actually want to get you to answer some questions in regard to that interaction that you had with Elon Musk, in which he called you a Richard. Obviously, that's what you're referring to. So that was spurred from this criticism that you were getting for not being present for a House Oversight Committee vote that was seeking to subpoena Elon Musk in regard to his actions with the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, unfortunately, Republicans were able to block the subpoena of Elon Musk 20-19, and you weren't present, right? And so you had argued that you weren't present because you weren't informed about the vote. However, 3 Democrats, according to Politico, familiar with the run-up to the vote, who were granted anonymity, said Democrats were given a heads up about the maneuver to try to catch Republicans by surprise. Because of that prior notice and the congressman's ties to Elon Musk, they're referring to you there, the 3 Democrats accused you of making an intentional decision to miss the vote. How do you respond to that?
First of all, the story was corrected. I mean, the reporter had to basically delete a tweet and issue a correction, and they were all anonymous sources and exactly incorrect. And the reason is because we could call the vote at any time. I've called for having the vote again. The reality is that Connolly's staff tried to sneak a vote when 10 people were out, and their hope was to get it through. But there were 10 people who missed it. It wasn't just, it was 8 Republicans. There were me and Kwame Bafume. I came back and I said he should be subpoenaed. And I said, let's have the vote again to go on the record. The irony is Musk and Trump had no clue of what was going on. It's only when I tweeted out to Elon directly that it got their attention. And we can either have this performative stuff that doesn't go anywhere, or we can have people who actually know how to take on these folks.
Yeah, so I'm curious when you realized like they're not gonna do almost anything they promised, because I had that moment and I want to run it by you. I agree with you. The smart way to cut out the bureaucracy and the fraud, waste, and abuse is you do an analysis, not a 5-year analysis with committee after committee, but you take some period of time, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, to do a real analysis to cut the fat rather than the muscle, as opposed to what you described as the dumb way a minute ago, which is come in with a blind hatchet, just cut things whether we think we need them or we don't need them. And to me, when they said, oh, we're gonna do the 8% cuts in defense for 5 years in a row, I was excited. Oh, that's terrific. That's exactly what we wanted. Now, of course, the devil's in the details and we'll see what they cut. But it's a great start. It's about $250 billion over 5 years. But then they said that money will not actually be cut. It will be redirected to other parts of the Pentagon.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so you don't mean any of this. That's to me where I thought, this is all smokes and mirrors.
Wait, let me add to that, because the House budget that Republicans are currently working on also allocates an additional 150, I believe, was it million or $1 billion?
It's got to be billion.
It's got to be billion. It's the Pentagon. Yeah, another $150 billion for the Pentagon. And so it's just, I feel like there's some tricky pizzicky behavior happening here with what Republicans are claiming they want to do and cutting the fat at the Pentagon. What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm the guy who gets booed every year. Literally, you could go on my Instagram and see it. 67 people on the House Armed Services Committee, and the vote is usually 66-1. And colleagues who like me on the armed services often go, Khanna, vote yes, boo when I vote no. So I always was very skeptical that Donald Trump would actually be able to get cuts to the Pentagon through the Armed Services Committee, given the makeup of that committee. And this is partly why people like Bernie and I said, yes, Elon, if you want to try to take on this fight that some of us have been fighting for years, go for it, and we'll support you. Now, it is sad to me that they want to repurpose that money, and basically that's smoke and mirrors. But I will say this, by Donald Trump saying that the Pentagon should be cut, by Elon Musk saying that the Pentagon should be cut, by Trump saying that we should have a 50% that kind of China and Russia agree, he's opened the space for progressives not to be scared of our own shadow and say, you know what, maybe we can be for these Pentagon cuts to invest in the American people. If Donald Trump can be saying it, why do we have to be out there doing what Kamala Harris did, standing with Liz Cheney and talking about higher Pentagon budgets? Why don't we actually take the populist position?
Amen. Yeah, yes, I totally agree with you on that. So, tomorrow you're scheduled to hold a Zoom call with individuals who have been fired from their federal jobs, but these individuals happen to be Trump voters. And so I love that you're doing that because I think their stories matter, and approaching it from a place of empathy rather than pointing and laughing at them, I think is the right approach. But your approach, again, is so different from what I'm seeing from other members of the Democratic Party. And I've noticed that there's been this like uplifting of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who's very passionate. She's got a lot to say, but her messaging is very different from what you're trying to do. And I want to give you a quick example and then get your thoughts. Let's take a look.
We fail to realize how selfish people are. People go out and they vote in their own self-interest, right? And so you had all these racists that showed up and decided that they were gonna vote for the other races because they thought, hey, we are all the same. But the reality is that he is a rich racist, okay? And so when he decided that he was gonna look out for somebody, it was only gonna be other rich white guys, not the rest of y'all. So as you're losing your job, as you're losing your Medicaid, as you're losing your farm, you're feeling away because you're like, wait a minute, you were supposed to go after the others, not come after us.
So Congressman Khanna, just to give you my thoughts on all of this, I just feel that the Democrats have already had 8 straight years of that kind of messaging, and it has only pushed voters out of the Democratic Party. A lot of the people who voted for Trump this time around are either independent voters or people who were voting Democrat yesterday, right? Like people who voted for Joe Biden, for instance. So I feel that maybe referring to them all as racists isn't going to help the Democrats' cause. But I am curious what you think about it and whether or not there are any discussions happening, behind the scenes about what the Democrats plan to do moving forward to ensure that you guys have consistent messaging.
Well, look, I don't view this just as a messaging issue. I view this as, what do you believe about America? I believe this is an extraordinary country. I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up in Bucks County in the 1970s and 1980s. It was 99% white. I had coaches who believed in me. I had teachers who believed in me. I saw parts of Pennsylvania where my father worked in manufacturing hollowed out. I saw wealth concentrate in my district in Silicon Valley, $12 trillion of wealth in places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, places like Alquippa, places like Warren, Ohio, totally deindustrialized. The economic inequality in this country skyrocket. And there being deep concern that the system is broken with offshoring corporations, with billionaires, and people wanted change. That's why they voted for Donald Trump. Now, does that mean that we have to deny that there was slavery in this country for 250 years and 100 years of Jim Crow? Of course not. But what we need to say is that fundamentally, this is a decent country. I believe that the people will be willing to vote for us if we have a compelling vision to make their life better and recognize the brokenness of the status quo. And that is not a messaging issue. That is what I believe about America. I believe the country started in 1776, not 1619, because the ideals that are defined in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence are what America stands for. And we ought to have this debate as Democrats, and we ought to say what we really believe about the country as opposed to just worrying about messaging.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll double down on a couple of things, but it leads to a question. So I agree with you that asking Trump voters, hey, where did it go wrong for you and how did you get hurt by this administration, but in an empathetic way, is definitely the right way to go. So I noticed you're doing that, and there's like, you even got a Google Doc on your TikTok account where they could fill it out. I mean, I love it, it's great. And Jasmine Crockett's got a lot of fight in her, so I appreciate that. I think that direction is a little wrong, as we all just discussed here. So I don't want to put it on Jasmine Crockett, but there is a contingent there that says, no, let's just yell at them more. So that's a plan, not, in my opinion, not much of a plan. You have a clear plan that you outlined earlier, you and Bernie do, which is work with them if they actually do agree with us on anything and then fight them on things we disagree on. What I'm curious about is there a third plan? because I don't see another plan. So does Democratic leadership, without naming names, but do they have one? Because the country hasn't seen it. What is their plan for how to deal with the Trump administration?
I think their plan is the plan that Democrats have gone through time and again, which is to point out, which is true, that a lot of these cuts are going to deeply hurt people. The Medicaid cuts, the cuts in people who keep our planes safe and prevent bird flu and keep our nuclear secrets safe and fund cancer research. Here's my problem with that. I actually believe it'll work for 2026 because I think for the first time, Trump's numbers are below the water on the economy. His entire first term, he didn't have his numbers low on the economy, below 50%. But for some reason, he decided that instead of being a Trump Republican, he's going to allow Elon Musk to become a Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan Republican on steroids. And he's seeing the consequences. Fine, so we get back the House. Maybe we even win the presidency by default. What is our vision? What is our vision just to continue to try to win by default because they go too far and then not have a governing majority in the House or the Senate where we're actually being able to address the legitimate anger of working class Americans of all races? Or are we going to try to do something meaningful with the power we will be handed? And that to me is the failure of leadership in the Democratic Party. We are just being tactical. We're hoping that they self-destruct. Fortunately, they're self-destructing, but there's not enough focus, as Bernie Sanders has, on a concrete vision going forward to solve the massive inequality and to understand that many people who voted for Trump were not just angry, they were justifiably angry.
All right, Representative Ro Khanna, good to see that there is at least one person who understands what's going on in the House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, and good luck with the new project.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.